Welcome, Jenny. Very nice that you could come and share your knowledge with us this afternoon. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Jenny is a botanical consultant who has worked and lived in the wheat belt at various times since 1990, when she worked for the Department of Agriculture on the National Soil Conservation Program based in Mora. She has worked on WWF Woodland Watch and Healthy Bushlands projects, as well as with West Midland Group and Department of Environment and Conservation Parks and Wildlife. Fun fact, I was once surveying with someone who saw a mulga ant's nest for the first time. Then we came across a malleefowl mound, and she was very concerned about the size of the ants that made that one. Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you. So, I was hoping that you'd appreciate that joke.
Is that short enough?
Just down the down.
Oh, just down a bit. Yeah.
You're a bit short.
Hey, I'm a bit short, am I? Okay, it helps with the vegetation surveys. Okay, I'll sort of talk this way. I'm going to talk about the unique vegetation complexes on rocky hills in the wheat belt. What I want to do is sort of talk a little bit about the background of them, how they're formed, because then that helps with their management and the restoration of them. There's a lot of things that need to be looked at with geology. So I've got a bit of nerves as well, but I'll get warmed up in a minute. Because of the type of the geology is going to determine what sort of soils and landforms are going to occur with all the weathering processes and erosion and everything else. Climate is going to have a fairly big impact on the vegetation that's going to develop there. Especially like a geographic location within the wheat belt, you know, the closer to the coast you are, the more rainfall you have, the further inland you have a reduction in rainfall, and then you have changes in temperature. So, you know, wherever your rocky outcrop is, the geographic location is going to have a big impact on the type of vegetation that you might have there. Fauna, the types of animals that are already present within your rocky outcrop may have some impacts on what plants grow there as well. You know, depending on like disturbance and pollinators and the types of birds that are going to eat the fruit and disperse it and all those sort of things. And then we'll also be looking at the hydrology, both the surface hydrology as well as groundwater. And big factor that a lot of people have already hit on today, which is isolation. So we're looking at the isolation and fragmentation of the whole suite of remnant vegetation across the wheat belt. Okay, there's a lot of different types of rocky hills which occur in the wheat belt. So most people really think about the granite and gneiss type substrate rocks. So you can think of all your granite outcrops. There's quite a lot of those, but there's also other types of rocky hills, rocky outcrops in the wheat belt. You have some banded ironstone formations, and they're mostly up in the northeast region and going more into the rangelands. You have your sedimentary rocks, sandstones, conglomerates and siltstones. And then there's chert, which anybody that lives around Mora has probably heard of chert. That's a metamorphosed sedimentary rock. And then you have your laterite, and a lot of people would have come across your laterite breakaways with beautiful landforms. And there are actually some volcanic landforms, rocky outcrops in the wheat belt. It's not very well known, but up around Morowa, you've got a small area of what's called Morowa lava is still there. but I'll show you some pictures of that in a minute. So, do most of you know how the wheat belt formed, like how Western Australia, the geology of the southwestern area? A little bit?
A little bit.
A little bit, okay. Okay, hey? Yeah, the wheat belt is underlain by the Yilgarn Craton, which is an Aboriginal word meaning quartz. And it's supposed to be one of the oldest stable sort of areas of rock in the world. It's about 2,700, maybe 3,000 million years old. And not that many changes have happened to it since then. It's gone through vast amounts of weathering. There would have originally been a lot of mountains, mountain ranges, and it's all been eroded, weathered. Gone through many different changes of climate. Sometimes it's been wetter and hotter, and then it's become glacial. So you've had glacial and interglacial periods. So at the moment we're in an interglacial period. There's no glaciers out there at the moment. So as the plateau has eroded down the ancient rocks, they've been exposed, and so they're present today as granite and gneissic outcrops, a lot of them. The sediments which were laid down have become lithified, become rock, and that includes your sandstones and your conglomerates and your siltstones. Some of those were laid down in shallow marine environments, and you end up with your dolomites and other rocks like that. So, I'll just go on to the next slides. These are some images of granite outcrops. So I might just move this around a bit. So these are some granite and gneiss outcrops from various locations over the wheat belt. You have areas of fairly broad, open, bare rock, and you have little patches of sort of shallow soil around them. And this one here is at the base of a long slope. It's got shallow soils and water pools here, but it's only for short periods of time, so it's only going to support things like annuals and plants which grow from corms or little bulbs, and so they don't last very long as a plant above the ground. And you also have the Borgers, the little liliaceae plants, the pincushions with the little white flowers. They survive in those patches. But on some of your rocky outcrop areas, you can have much deeper pockets of soil, and they'll even support woodlands and tall shrublands. These are some nama holes. These are very important for Aboriginal people. Used to use these as a water supply for a lot of the times of the year when they're inland, needed a supply of water. Animals use them as well, and they can also be a place where you have aquatic plants surviving. And these are just some other sort of habitat areas on your rocky outcrops. Now these are some images of the basalts up around Morowa. This photo is taken from up near the top of the hill, and you can see the profile of the basalt, and it's a typical sort of weathering pattern into blocky chunks. So looking east towards the Kulanuka Hills way over in the distance. This is some of your scree slopes with your basalt, and it supports a different type of vegetation than what you find in many other places. One of the plants that grows there is the Eremophila cerulata, And this is right at the western edge of its range. Most of the others grow out further in the arid zone or semi-arid zone. On some of the other scree slopes you have this Grevillea asparagoides, lots of gravelly outwash slopes. And this photo at the top just shows you how some of the plants get their roots into the cracks in the rocks and get down to get the water supplies which are further down. This is another scree slope on the other side of Billaranga Hills, and this scree slope's made out of chert and sandstone. And we've got a different acacia that grows here. This one is Acacia terricolum, and it occurs on a couple of rocky hills up around the Morawa area. I'll skip this bit. These are some this is some of the geology, some of the rocks that occur around Yandanuka. Yandanuka is between Three Springs and Minganoo, which I just think there. No. There was actually some glacial activity here, and that was quite a while ago, but it actually ended up with the formation of some of the rocks called tillite, which is made up of crushed rock, sort of, it's like a gritty sort of sandstone. There's another type of sandstone that occurs here which is called a whack, and it's got a high content of clay in it. And on top of the hills you've got a conglomerate layer, and then below that you have some scree slopes, and you have a lot of caves and a lot of different types of habitats which are formed there. On some of the sandstone you have Melaleuca sclerophylla occurring, which is it's not that rare. It's actually been found at quite a few other sites as well, also on granite. Found a leucopogon here, which has only been found at this site at the moment, Leucopogon stokesii, and it occurs on these outwash slopes just below the lip of the sandstone and the conglomerate, which is up the top of the slope. Banded iron formation. These are ancient sedimentary rocks of alternating bands of chert and iron, chert and iron oxide, and they mostly occur on the eastern side of the wheat belt in the northern area, and they go across into the this sort of semi-arid area into the Murchison and that sort of region. Places where they occur in the wheat belt are Coolanuka Hills, the Prindri Hills, minor areas of the Moonagin and Milton Ranges, which are just north of Morawa, and the Mount Gibson Range, which is east of Prindri. So these are a few images of the rock formations that you can see. You can see here, they were originally sedimentary rocks. Some of them have been folded and uplifted. You can see here that the bedding is going that way, and you have big, long, deep cracks in the rocks, and the plants get their roots in there, and you also have water stored much further way down in the profile. So that sort of formation of the landform helps these plants survive. These are some bands of quartz in between some siltstone, and then you have here jasperite, and you can see how the rock's been folded. And these are just some more photos of the formation of the landforms, and you can see how water pools there. You've got so many different little spots where the plants you've got different habitats, lots of different microclimates and different microhabitats.
Whereabouts is that, Jane?
I'm cheating. Most of those are actually from the Blue Hills, about 80 kilometres east of Morawa. So that's a lot of the same sort of rocks occur in Coolanuka Hills, which is just near Morawa. The Chert Hills, these are just outside of Mora, and they're formed of a type of chert called a noondyne chert, and that's sort of got laid down in a sort of fairly quiet marine, sort of freshwater or very slow moving water environment. And then it's been metamorphosed. There's the Darling Fault running up there. Mora's sitting down here. Three Springs is up there. The main areas of Chert Hills which are left with vegetation in good condition, mostly between Mora, Coomerdale and Wallaroo, so this area here. You've got the Jingamaya Cave, which occurs just out on the other side of Wallaroo, up there. I think that's about right. Rachel kindly loaned me a couple of photos of the vegetation. She just went out there the other day and it's looking absolutely gorgeous. So, because of the soil types which are formed with the chert, which is very different to other sort of rocky outcrop types, you end up with a unique suite of species which occur there. Laterite, this is formed during the tertiary period, which was about 60 million years ago to 10 million years ago, and the climate in Western Australia was much moister than it is now. They say it could be like temperate to tropical climate, but there was a lot of water, and after and this led to like high rates of weathering and erosion of the rock formations or the landforms in the wheat belt area then. The deep soils that formed had a lot of accumulations of iron and aluminium in the upper, and silica in the upper parts of the horizon, and with the groundwater table which moved up and down, this ended up forming small gravel. You probably know your laterite gravel that you see out there, and in some cases it's all been cemented together, and you ended up with a formation of this lateritic rock in the upper parts of the soil profile, and then there was more weathering occurred, and then they've eventually been exposed. So you end up with these rocks, basically, which are just iron and aluminium rich, and some silica in there as well. So they're really good for formation of caves and other habitats, and you end up with shallow areas of soil over those rocks, and because the rocks are a different chemical composition to other things like your granite and your basalts, you end up with another suite of species growing on those. And that little bird there is a Carnaby's cockatoo. That was taken in August in Three Springs, just outside of Three Springs. So, and on the end here we have a sandalwood tree surviving on the laterite outcrop. That's near Morowa. One that got missed when they went through and cleared them. Okay, there was a few other slides in there which I'm not going to cover because I talked a bit too slow. Nanjing Hill is located in the central wheat belt, and I've been working out there for about 5 years off and on. Just looking at how you might approach trying to rehabilitate an area that's had a high level of impact. The black-flanked rock wallabies live up in those hills, and those populations of the wallabies were declining seriously, so they ended up putting a predator-proof fence around that whole reserve. So this is the reserve, and that little area there is that site there. That's the little apron just at the base of the rock. So 2013 I took this photo. This is when all the people were there for the official opening, and you can sort of see what sort of impacts have been on the vegetation. That's impacts from farming as well as from the wallabies coming down to graze because of they're too scared to leave the protection of the rocks because of cats and foxes. But all the foxes and cats have now been removed from the reserve. In 2015, we collected seed and they did some revegetating in fenced exclosures. This photo was taken last year, 2017. Just next to there is another quadrat which is outside the fenced area, so there's still impacts from grazing on there, and it was heavily weed infested last year, so it was sprayed. There's actually a couple of native plants growing there. There's like a little shrub there and another one here. There wasn't too many. They did actually survive the spraying. So after the other talk about herbicides, I'm interested to see what happens. We've got no money to go back and resurvey this area this year, but we're hoping to get funding to do it next year. This is a really big project which is part of one of AusCarbon's properties. So this carbon neutral is, they buy up properties at the edge of the wheat belt which have low potential to be of high agricultural value. So they've got, what would you call it? They're borderline, or as a property, they're not. You might have one good year in 5 years or something like that. So marginal. Yeah, marginal. Thanks. That's a good word. I'm trying to think that. But anyway, they've been doing a massive vegetation program, but they're also looking at carbon credits, so you can make you've got the potential to make money out of it as well. So what they've done is they've revegetated really large areas in between the hilltops, which were the only vegetation remaining. So we're looking from one hilltop here, or beside one hill, to another rocky outcrop over here, and then they're revegetating in between. So this is some of the revegetation which is on the lower areas. And this is a quadrat that's been set up in the control up on the hill. So eventually, as these trees are starting to grow, they're going to provide a link or a corridor for the birds and reptiles and other animals to move between the remnant areas. There's another guy who's studying the birds there, and there's somebody else who's studying the insects, so we'll be monitoring this over the next 10 years or so to see what starts happening. That's the property there. The green areas were the remnant areas to start with, and now just about all these areas in between have been revegetated. This long area here is a saline valley, so you've got salt lakes, or actually it feeds into the large salt lakes down near Morowa. These areas used to be fresh once upon a time and good agricultural land, but with the rising groundwater tables they've all become salty. But what's going to hopefully happen with large-scale revegetation in these areas, and there's another couple of properties up here as well, is that hopefully there'll be a reduction in the amount of recharge to the groundwater, and you may even see some reversal in the amount of salt in the valleys. So the outcomes from this project is hopefully to link the remnant vegetation, which is mostly on the hills, fence the remnants to exclude grazing. They've planted it with a biodiverse range of species, so you're looking at I think it's about 15 or 18 different species at the moment, and they include shrubs and trees. And you've also got your native annuals which are starting to come back in. improving the movement of wildlife between the remnants, and this is including the movement of mammals, birds, reptiles and invertebrates. I mentioned reducing the recharge to the groundwater system and looking at the potential of carbon credits and reducing erosion on the slopes. And these are some animals that use the remnants on the rocky hills. The only, I caught this fox on a sensor camera near a nama hole. So most of these photos I've taken using a sensor camera. This little image of the black flank wallaby is taken by Phil Lewis, and that's at Mount Caroline in the wheat belt. So, sorry, it's
Are you ready?
Yep.